All right, so let's get going on today's class. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue with our look at extinction. Last time we just introduced the idea of extinction and talked about one of the side effects. Today we're going to finish our introduction for extinction, go through the major side effects, a very special type of an extinction procedure, and then once that intro is done, we're going to take a look at extinction in action in a very interesting case study where psychologists used many of the techniques that you've learned in this semester to try to treat an individual that had self-injurious behavior. So this is an individual that would harm himself, and that behavior was inappropriate, it was unacceptable, it was harmful to the individual, it was harmful to those around him. So psychologists tried to treat this individual, and one of the major types of treatment that they used was extinction. So again, we'll take an overview of the general idea of extinction and some of its side effects, and then take a look at a special procedure called differential reinforcement of other behavior, and then we'll take a look at Harry and his treatment. All right, so in terms of extinction is a procedure where a previously reinforced response is now no longer being reinforced. So you had a response that was previously on a reinforcement contingency. It was previously being reinforced for occurring so that its occurrence increased in probability, increased in strength. And extinction is where you decrease the probability or decrease the strength of that response simply by no longer reinforcing that response. So you change the contingency so that response is no longer followed by reinforcement. So a laboratory example of this, and one that you have all completed as part of your homework. Sniffy was being reinforced for pressing a lever. So lever press was the operant behavior. Food was the reinforcement. And what you did is you put a Sniffy through an extinction procedure where food was previously reinforced. And then once the extinction procedure began, food was no longer being reinforced. And as you saw in your assignment, this led to the gradual decrease in both the frequency and probability of future lever presses by Sniffy. So it got to the point where Sniffy was no longer pressing the lever, and that cumulative recorder just kind of flatlined and did not, there were no more responses. So in today's video, we're going to see the same analogous situation. We're going to see first an analysis that the therapist did that identified the fact that Harry was being reinforced for his self-injurious behavior. So there was a contingency in Harry's life, in his interaction with other people, that was a reinforcement contingency, and this reinforcement contingency was what caused one of the reasons that his behavior, his self-injurious behavior, became such a problem. So they identified this situation in his life where when he injured himself by, for example, punching himself in the face, that injury or that behavior was followed by reinforcement. And we'll take a look at what that reinforcement was. Now, to treat this, one of the things they did is they put Harry on an extinction program where they basically said, all right, we've identified that his self-injurious behavior is being followed by a reinforcer, so we're going to put him on extinction, and now, when we're treating him, his self-injurious behavior will no longer be followed by a reinforcer. So in the video, keep your eye out for that change. Keep your eye out for how they remove reinforcement for Harry's self-injurious behavior in order to put him on an extinction paradigm. All right, so extinction, pretty straightforward in its conceptual idea. You have a response that was previously being reinforced, and you just remove the reinforcement for that response. The response will eventually go down in both probability and frequency and intensity. However, it is very important, especially if you're in clinical psychology or even just in everyday life, if you're going to apply an extinction paradigm, to be aware that there are many extinction side effects that are oftentimes not pleasant for either the person who's going through the extinction paradigm or for the therapist, clinician, or psychologist who is implementing the extinction paradigm. So it's very important to be aware of these side effects because to the average individual, it might seem, these side effects make it seem as if the extinction is not working, as if the treatment is a failure. However, to a psychologist, these extinction side effects do the exact opposite. They let you know that you are well on your way to achieving extinction of that target response. So what are some of these extinction side effects? We already mentioned last time, extinction burst. This is one of the most common ones and well-known ones. An extinction burst is where you get a temporary increase in both the frequency and or intensity of the response as soon as extinction is implemented. So what this means is that literally your target behavior, your operant behavior that was reinforced will get more intense. The situation will get worse immediately after extinction is implemented. So one example we'll use for this, to illustrate this, again, we'll go back to that parent whose child throws tantrums in the supermarket. And every single time they go to the supermarket, the child throws a tantrum. They end up buying the child a chocolate bar. And then once the child gets a chocolate bar, they don't throw the tantrum. The tantrum stops. In this case, as a psychologist, you would look at that and you would say, all right, the target behavior is the tantrum. The consequence of the tantrum is a chocolate bar. So a tantrum is being followed by a chocolate bar. That's reinforcement for this child, because if this child was left up to their own devices, they would eat this many chocolate bars. Right now they have access to this many chocolate bars. So we know that chocolate bar is a reinforcer because of the response deprivation hypothesis. So this is the situation. That tantrum is being reinforced by the consequence of that chocolate bar. If that parent decides that they are no longer going to give in to this child, if that parent decides that enough is enough, they cannot reinforce this behavior of throwing a tantrum in the supermarket, they can't reward it any longer with a chocolate bar, and they draw their line in the sand and they say, from now on, no more chocolate bars in the supermarket. As soon as they put that extinction paradigm into play, they need to be ready for the worst tantrum that child has ever thrown in a supermarket. And that's because of extinction burst. So if the child was yelling, the child's now going to yell louder because of the extinction paradigm. If the child was crying, the child is now going to cry harder because of the extinction paradigm. That target behavior is going to go from this level to this level because of the extinction paradigm. And that's when a lot of people who are unfamiliar with psychology give up, because they think to themselves, well, I could barely stand a tantrum at its normal level. Now I'm trying to, get rid of it, and it's even worse. So clearly what I'm doing is not working. As psychologists, however, we know that this extinction burst is just a side effect of the extinction procedure actually working. So if you ever decide to go through or apply an extinction paradigm to any individual, be prepared for that target behavior that you're trying to get rid of to get worse. So, for example, new parents, if you're trying to have your child sleep through the night, or if you're trying to stop a behavior that you previously reinforced, oftentimes they will say, pick a time in your life that is not stressful. So if you got a little bit of vacation coming up, maybe Thanksgiving is coming up around the corner, you don't have to go to work for a few days, that's the day that you want to do it, because this situation is going to get way worse before it gets better because of that extinction burst. All right, so that's extinction burst. What other side effects do we have? We have an increase in variability. So an increase in variability means that whatever the behavior was, it would have a certain amount of variability. Once you put in that extinction paradigm, that variability is going to increase. So the child who was throwing a tantrum, might have done two things. They might have yelled and they might have cried. That might have been the two kind of instances of variability in their tantrum behavior. Once you start an extinction paradigm, you have to be prepared for the side effect of an increase in variability. So now, in addition to yelling and in addition to crying, they might start throwing things. They might start falling on the ground. They might start using foul language. You know, they might start dropping F-bombs. You've never heard that from your child before. Increase in variability. So again, this is seems like the situation's getting worse, but what it is, it's another side effect of the extinction paradigm. Next side effect, emotional behavior. This is typically referred to in everyday language as frustration. So an extinction paradigm is never a pleasant thing, right? Getting rid of a target behavior is never an easy thing. That's why people get frustrated when they're trying to get rid of a bad habit, but you never get frustrated when you're developing, you know, a new habit. When you're learning something new, typically you get reinforced and there's that joy of learning something new. When you're trying to get rid of a behavior, that's when you can oftentimes go through this frustration. So again, emotional behavior, it's not going to be a happy time. Oftentimes, this comes out in terms of that idea of frustration. Other side effect, aggression. So when you go through extinction paradigm or extinction procedure, you should prepare yourself for aggression from the individual. So when that child is no longer getting that chocolate bar, they might hit their parent, right? They might resort to physical violence. They might start directly yelling at the parent and using bad language towards the parent. They would show that aggression. And again, this is a side effect of extinction that is not seen with other contingencies. So it's very rare when somebody, if a child comes up to you and says, "Oh, Daddy, I got straight A's on my report card." And you're like, "Oh, that's great, sweetie. Here's a chocolate bar." That's not usually followed up by them punching you in the leg, right? That's not usually followed up by them going, "Arr!" Aggression doesn't happen after reinforcement. It does, though, after extinction. So once again, this can make it look like the treatment's failing. To a psychologist, it's another indication that your treatment is well underway. This extinction is well underway. Other things that can occur, resurgence. So resurgence is an interesting side effect, and it's basically when behaviors that had once been effective but had since been abandoned now come back again. So, for example, that child that was throwing a tantrum may not have sucked their thumb for years, right? They might have given up that habit years ago, but now that you're going through that extinction paradigm, that behavior might come back. That child may not have bit anybody. I know that some children, when they're first developing as toddlers, oftentimes they'll bite people, not knowing what that behavior really means. They might not have bit somebody for years. When you start the extinction paradigm, that might be the time that they start biting again. So this is a resurgence. It's not variability. It's not like new behaviors popping up. This is the comeback of previous behaviors, old behaviors that were abandoned, that had once been effective, now can come back due to the extinction paradigm or procedure. So once again, notice that this is a side effect that makes it look like your treatment is, again, ineffective. So you don't want a tantrum to be thrown in the supermarket, but now all of a sudden your child is biting people, and they haven't done that for 2 years. So you almost feel like you're regressing, like you're taking steps backwards developmentally. You're not. It's just a side effect of that extinction paradigm. All right, other side effects. Depression, specifically depressive-like symptoms. This kind of goes hand in hand with frustration. When people go through extinction, they get down, they get sad, they might get anxious, right? They might have a lot of those depressive-like symptoms, And again, this is a side effect of the fact that extinction is not a pleasant experience. Changing your behavior from something that you used to get reinforced to not being able to achieve that reinforcement anymore from that behavior is never a happy experience, right? It's never something that makes you feel good. So also get prepared for those depressive-like symptoms. So that child in the supermarket is not going to be happy that day. They might be crying in the supermarket, not tantrum crying, but like sad crying. And again, this is a side effect of extinction. All right. Any questions about the side effects? Okay. So notice that none of these side effects are desirable, right? None of these things are something that you're hoping for in your extinction paradigm. So psychologists have devised techniques in order to help alleviate some of these side effects, in order to reduce them as much as possible, to make the extinction procedure as straightforward and painless as possible. And one of those techniques is known as the differential reinforcement of other behavior, abbreviated as DRO. So do not read it as DRO, read it as differential reinforcement of other behavior. But what this procedure is, this differential reinforcement of other behavior, it's a concurrent schedule, meaning that it's a procedure that uses two contingencies at the same time. So when you're doing your extinction procedure, you set up your extinction procedure, that's contingency number one. And then to that, you add reinforcement of other behavior, that's contingency number two, and you have a concurrent at the same time schedules. So how would this work? Well, let's first take a look at a extinction procedure without the concurrent schedule, without that differential reinforcement of other behavior. So let's say that Sniffy used to do behavior A. We'll keep it kind of general and schematic for this example. Let's say that Sniffy used to do behavior A, and that was reinforced with food. And now you don't want Sniffy to do behavior A anymore. You don't want that behavior to occur. So you go through an extinction procedure. You stop reinforcing Sniffy for behavior A. Sniffy no longer receives food. From the point of view of Sniffy, this is something that can cause panic because Sniffy used to get food by doing behavior A, and now Sniffy is not getting food for doing behavior A. So to Sniffy, or to the organism, for all they know, that's it for food. They're never getting food again. Food is gone. There's no chance of food. They're going to starve to death because they're no longer getting reinforced for behavior A. So that's oftentimes what leads to these side effects, this extinction burst, the resurgence, the increase in variability, the aggression, all comes around because they're no longer able to earn that reinforcement. So what you do to alleviate those side effects is you introduce a concurrent schedule where you have a new behavior, and that new behavior is now being reinforced. So if Sniffy was bar pressing for food, and you don't want Sniffy to bar press anymore, you might take an extinction procedure and say, all right, no more food for bar pressing. However, you might say, all right, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to reinforce behavior B. So if he presses a panel, right, if he presses a little button with his nose, then he'll receive food. And this differential reinforcement of other behavior, behavior B is the other behavior, alleviates the extinction side effects because Sniffy can still earn food. However, now he's earning food for a different behavior, so you can reduce behavior A while Sniffy still can maintain his reinforcement. So an example of this, if you were to apply it to our supermarket tantrum example, the target behavior that we're trying to reduce is the tantrum. We are not trying to reduce the eating of chocolate bars. So chocolate bars can still be used as a reinforcement. All we want to do is we want to reduce the level of the tantrums. So differential reinforcement of other behavior would be to say to this child, all right, tantrums will no longer be reinforced with chocolate bars. However, if you help me put food items into the cart, then you will get a chocolate bar for that behavior. So you stop reinforcing tantrums, you put that on extinction, but you differentially reinforce other behavior, helping put items in the cart, and that now is being reinforced with the chocolate bar. In that situation, the extinction side effects, such as extinction burst, will be lessened because the child can still earn that reinforcement. They can still get rewarded. It's just now for a different behavior. So we're going to see this in Harry's treatment, where they no longer reinforce Harry for his self-injurious behavior. They put him on that extinction paradigm, but partially to make the extinction more straightforward and literally to make it less painless, because this is a harmful act. It does cause pain for Harry when he self-injures himself. In order to alleviate anything like extinction burst or frustration, or to minimize those, you'll see that they reinforce other behaviors. So there's going to be a bunch of other behaviors, appropriate behaviors, that they're going to continually reinforce. And what this does is it allows Harry to earn reinforcement for appropriate behavior, so he's still getting reinforced, while at the same time self-injury is no longer being reinforced. And that ability to earn reinforcement, even when your previous behavior is no longer being reinforced because it's on extinction, that leads to an alleviation or a minimizing of those extinction side effects. Any questions on differential reinforcement of other behavior? Mm-hmm.
So an example, so what is the reinforcement that they're reinforcing? Is it giving him attention? So would you give him attention when he's not doing the self-harm thing?
So we're going to, they'll go into more detail in that, in the video. But so there's a number of different ways that he was reinforced for self-harm. But the big one to keep an eye out for was that if he was required to do something and he injured himself, that requirement was taken away. So when he was at being tutored, and his tutor said, okay, write the alphabet, right? Let's practice writing our alphabet. If he was like, smacks himself in the face, the tutor would be like, all right, forget it. We won't do the alphabet today. Or if they said, Harry, enough TV, for tonight, we got to turn it off. And Harry's like, psh. And they're like, okay, fine, watch another half hour. So he was being reinforced for his self-injurious behavior. And you'll notice that when Dr. Fox is treating Harry, the one thing that him and his colleagues do is whatever they ask of Harry, even after Harry self-abuses, they continue to require him to do it. So you're going to see multiple instances where they're like, hey, let's work this page. Which point to the animals, pig, duck, frog. And Harry's like, smacks himself in the head. They go straight back to it. Which one is it? Point to the pig, point to the duck. And he's like, psh. And they're like, no, which one is it? So you'll see that they don't reinforce him by taking away the work that he needs to do. However, they do reinforce him for appropriate behavior. So you'll see those throughout, and pay attention for the kind of reinforcement that they use. They use all different kinds in this scenario, but they are heavily reinforcing other behavior. All right, so that differential reinforcement of other behavior is a concurrent schedule. You have your extinction schedule, and you have your reinforcement schedule. And that's the general case. The reinforcement of other behavior is the general case. But there's a particular version of it that is very, very effective, and that is known as the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. So this is a special situation of the differential reinforcement of other behavior, where that other behavior that you choose is incompatible with the behavior that you're trying to go through extinction with. So for example, that child in the supermarket, if the parent says, all right, for the tantrum, you're yelling, you're crying, you are no longer going to be reinforced with a chocolate bar for yelling and crying. That's the extinction paradigm. If they say, however, if you help me load the food into the cart, at the end of our shopping trip, I'll give you a chocolate bar, right? Positive reinforcement for loading the food into the cart. That's differential reinforcement for other behavior, because those two behaviors, crying and yelling and loading food into the cart, are not incompatible. That child could be loading the cereal boxes and being like, I hate you, you're the worst parent ever. Oh, when I get old enough, I'm going to buy all the chocolate bars I want. You're not my dad, I hate you. You know, they can do that, right? They can do the two behaviors at the same time. More effective would be to choose a behavior that is incompatible with the yelling and the crying. So if that parent says, all right, this is what we're going to do. Tantrums will no longer be rewarded with a chocolate bar, but we're going to play the silent game. And if you can stay quiet for 15 minutes, we're going to give you a chocolate bar. And staying silent and yelling and crying, you can't do the two of them at the same time. And that is a way more effective instance of differential reinforcement of other behavior, and it gets its own special name, the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. So keep your eye out when they're treating Harry. They will use differential reinforcement of other behavior, but oftentimes they very specifically choose activities that are the differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. So the way that he injures himself is predominantly using his fists. So keep an eye out for activities that they have him do where he has to use his hands in order to complete that activity, meaning that he can't use his hands to injure himself. Differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, and it's a much more effective form of the differential reinforcement of other behavior procedure. All right, any questions on that? Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a look at the video, the Harry video. Before we get into this, this is copyright. So from about this point on, the rest of this video will not be up on the YouTube lectures. So we will have a recap of this next class. We're going to go through it all and make sure that we do a little bit of a deeper analysis of it. There is a synopsis uploaded to Canvas so that you can get kind of a summary of what happened in the video. And also, this DVD is available in the IUSB library. So you can go and have access to that if you want to go and review it. And for anybody that couldn't make it in today, that's where you can find the Harry video. All right, so without further ado, here we go with the treatment of Harry. And again, keep your eyes open for the extinction procedure. Keep your eyes open for differential reinforcement of other behavior, specifically differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior. And also, as it's going through this, try to identify contingencies, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, and other terms and concepts that we've been using or learning in this class. You'll see that basically 90% of this uses the stuff that you have already learned in this class. So it's just an indication of exactly how powerful the techniques that you're learning about are in terms of changing behavior. It's going to be loud.
We submitted our program to the State Department of Mental Retardation. Having obtained their approval, we were ready to begin the treatment. We began by conducting 6 5-minute baseline sessions.
All right, so before they get into the baseline sessions, just to point out the differential reinforcement of other behaviors. So one of the things they're going to do is they are no longer going to reinforce Harry's self-abuse. So you remember that they already mentioned that, if Harry was pressed to do a task, if he had to engage in a social situation, he would self-abuse, and then he would be left alone. So one of the first things they're going to do is put in that extinction paradigm so that Harry is no longer going to get left alone. He's no longer going to have that task that is required removed as a consequence of the self-abuse. So that's the removal of the reinforcement. They're no longer going to reinforce Harry for his self-abuse. The other thing that they're going to do is they're going to put that differential reinforcement of other behavior. So they're going to require Harry to do other tasks, to do basically homework, almost, you can think of it, that they assign for him. And that was going to be rewarded by giving him his restraints back. And that's one of the really interesting things about this treatment is the fact that Harry found his restraints reinforcing. Now that's something, that's an indication of why you need to define reinforcers in a certain way. Reinforcement is something that increases the probability of a behavior, and that's it. Because for most of us, restraints would not be reinforcing. If anybody came up to us and said, hey, you count to 100 and I'll tie you up and so you're immobile, you'd be like, get away from me. That's not what I want. So for most of us, reinforcement wouldn't be, restraints wouldn't be reinforcing. But they know going in that, that these restraints are going to be reinforcing for Harry. So can anybody here kind of speculate using the response deprivation hypothesis, how it is that they would know that the restraints would be reinforcing for Harry if they took them away? How is it that they know that Harry would want to earn those back?
When you start hitting himself more often.
He will start hitting himself once the restraints are taken away. So it's going to be a challenge. But in terms of the response deprivation hypothesis, if Harry was left to his own devices, based on what you just heard, the description of him that you just heard, how often would Harry wear his restraints? All the time. Harry would literally wear his restraints 24 hours a day if he was left to his own devices. What that means is that Harry's preferred level of the behavior of wearing a restraint is 24 hours a day. What happens when you take his restraints away for him to complete a task? He still wants the 24 hours. So even if you take him away for just 10 seconds, the level with which he is doing the behavior of being in restraints falls below his preferred level. He wants it all the time. As soon as you take it away, that's below the level that he wants his restraints. So by taking the restraints away, by saying, Harry, take those restraints off, we're going to hold them, you're not wearing them right now, they ensured that his preferred level of behavior of wearing restraints dropped below what he wanted. It was restricted below what he wanted. And from that and the response deprivation hypothesis, they knew going in that those restraints were going to be reinforcing for Harry. So they knew that they could use that as a reinforcer. Mm-hmm.
You said for a negative punishment, include the full body.
Yes. Yeah, that was always a little bit weird for me. That's the third level that they had. And you would think that if restraints are reinforcing, then like a full body restraint would just be the uber reinforcement, like just the top you can think of. That's a good catch. Interestingly, they never go past level 1. So in this entire procedure, the paradigms that they put in are so effective, they never have to go to contingent electric shocks. They never have to go to the full restraint procedure. But yeah, I noticed that too, where it's like, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to reward you with, $5, but if you don't do what I want, I'm going to give you $1,000. It's like, well, okay. But yeah, they never actually had to get to that level. Mm-hmm.
My thought on that is when he's wearing his restraints and he's being calm, he's usually left alone. If people are restraining him, he's not being left alone necessarily.
Yeah, that might have been the logic behind it.
But I do get weird.
Yeah, it is a little bit of a weird kind of thing to do. Yep.
When you were explaining the reinforcer, for me, like I thought that being alone would be the reinforcer because he's talking about how he becomes, I just did what determined to do a task. So
Yep.
in that they leave him alone, which he stops self-injuring. So wouldn't being left alone be the reinforcement as well?
Well, in that case, more accurately, I would say that the removal of the task was the reinforcer. So being left alone, I think, was a side effect of that. And it's quite possible that being left alone was also a reinforcer for Harry. I would say maybe it's difficult to say for sure because across human existence, across cultures, across generations and time, one of the worst things you can do to a human being is leave them alone, right? So things like exile, literally like just get away from us. What's the worst thing they do to a prisoner in prison when they break all the rules? They put him in solitary confinement. So maybe Harry found being left alone reinforcing. However, the reinforcement that he did receive was that he was given a task, and if he self-abused, that task was taken away, and his self-abuse got more intense because of that. So does anybody know what kind of reinforcement that is? So he needed to do a task. After the self-abuse, the task was taken away. So what kind of reinforcement is that? That's negative reinforcement. So Harry lived in a homework, you need to do homework world until he self-abused. And then they said, all right, fine, no homework. He lived in a you need to do these chores world until he self-abused. And then they said, all right, no more chores for you. That's fine. Something was taken away. The homework, the task, the chores was taken away. As a consequence of the self-abuse got worse. Getting worse is the reinforcement. Taken away is the negative aspect of it. All right, so we have that differential reinforcement of behavior set up. They're going to go through the extinction paradigm. Self-abuse is no longer going to be rewarded or reinforced by removing a task. And they're going to add a reinforcement paradigm of other behavior. So appropriate behaviors, approved behaviors, will now be reinforced by giving Harry back his restraints.
With Harry out of restraints. The sessions were kept brief because there were no consequences for self-abuse. In the baseline, we measured Harry's level of self-abuse across a variety of conditions.
All right, so just so we know where we're picking up, right now they're doing the baseline procedure. So if you remember those single subject designs where you have the reversal design, you start with a baseline and then you go to the treatment. Right now they're going to do a baseline procedure just to see what Harry's rate of self-abuse is without any treatment.
Distract him from hitting himself. Note that Harry is self-restraining with his left arm by wrapping it in his shirt. This was the first time he self-restrained. Unfortunately, we would see a lot more of this self-restraint in the future. The brief baseline revealed that Harry had a high, stable rate of self-abuse across a variety of conditions.
All right, so they observed Harry during the baseline. And Dr. Fox just said that that brief baseline where they were observing Harry showed that he had a high, stable rate of self-abuse. So thinking back to the schedules of reinforcement, thinking back to those 4 basic schedules of reinforcement, does anybody remember which one of those, fixed ratio, variable ratio, fixed interval, or variable interval, which one of those led to a high, stable rate, no post-reinforcement pause, of behavior? So it would have been the one that had the cumulative recorder. That looked like that. Anyone remember? That's a variable ratio. So this is that high stable rate where there's no post-reinforcement pause, where you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. At a high rate is a variable ratio scheduled reinforcement. If the rate was lower, that would indicate a variable interval variable interval schedule of reinforcement. So based on this observation that Harry had a high stable rate of self-injurious behavior, that indicated that previously he had been reinforced on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement. So his self-injurious behavior was being reinforced on a variable ratio schedule. So most likely, this variable ratio schedule was first implemented by Harry's parents. Now, try to think about this, try to speculate, why would Harry's parents have ever put him on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement for his self-injurious behavior? Mm-hmm.
He's hitting himself, so maybe it's that he didn't want to hurt himself, but the only way to stop hurting himself is to straight, and every time that he's hitting himself, they're like training him to stop the behavior.
Every time he was hitting himself, they were
Stopping
stopping their behavior? Okay. So it wouldn't have been, though, every time he hit himself, because that would be a continuous reinforcement schedule. It has to be on a variable reinforcement schedule.
Could it be when he does the most damage maybe when hitting himself, or?
It could be when he did the most damage.
That's what
Mhm.
maybe it's because they would ask him to do a task and he'd hit himself to get out of it.
Yeah.
And so they gave him not a specific amount of time, and then they come back and ask him to do it once he calmed down, but it's not over like specific time.
Okay, and why would they be variable in that time? Yep.
Maybe,
Or what were you thinking?
maybe because they tried to like prevent him from hurting himself multiple times, so like sometimes they would kind of let it go on longer to see if he would stop doing
Yes, exactly. So this variable ratio reinforcement schedule was implemented, and this is one of the saddest things about Harry's story, at least for me. I'll try to get through without crying. But it was implemented by parents who cared. And much like when you were, if you go to one of your old Sniffy files and go to where he was being continuously reinforced, one bar press, one pellet of food, put him on an extinction schedule, and you will see just how quickly Sniffy's going to give up, right? It's analogous to if you have a brand new car, right? Let's say that you just bought a brand new car, you drove it off the lot, you take it home, you turn it on, well, they got the new ones. You press the brake, you press the button, and it turns on first try. You press the brake the next day, you press the button, turns on first try. Press the brake, press the button, turns on first try. You get reinforced every single time. You press the brake, press the button, turns on first try. The first time it doesn't, the first time you press the brake, press the button, and nothing happens. You're going to press the brake and press the button again. Nothing's going to happen. You're going to press the brake, press the button again. Nothing's going to happen. You might do that maybe 5, 6 times. And then you're going to say, I'm done. I'm calling a mechanic. This has got to be fixed. Something's wrong. Contrast that with the situation where you have an old jalopy, right, that is barely running. And you have to do like this really kind of contrived thing where you turn it on, right? So you put the keys in the ignition, right? But you got to wait 3 seconds, and then you turn it, but then you got to turn it back a bit, but then you got to turn it, then you get a little bit of gas, and then it'll start up. Let's say that it only starts up on average 1 out of every 10 times that you try it. One day that car is going to be broken. It's just not going to work anymore. Think to yourself, how many times are you going to try to turn that car on before you give up? If 1 out of 10 times is your average, you're going to be sitting there 10 times. You're going to try 11 times. You're going to try 15 times. You're going to try 20 times. You're going to try 30 times. You're going to try. You might go as high as 70 before you say to yourself, something's got to be wrong. This is way too much. So on a variable or intermittent schedule of reinforcement, the extinction paradigm is way, way harder. So unfortunately, Harry's parents actually cared about him. And that's the sort of paradox here. Unfortunately, they actually cared about him, and they tried their best to treat Harry's self-injurious behavior. Unfortunately, number one, they didn't have psychological training. Number two, they're human. And humans have good days, and humans have bad days. So on the good days, when they came home and they said, you know what, our son is self-abusing, I am full of willpower today. Today is the day that he is going to clean his room. Right? This is going to be the day. When they go in there and they say, Harry, you're going to clean your room. And Harry's like, boom. And they're like, nope, you're going to clean your room. Boom. And they're like, nope, you're going to clean your room. Boom. And their willpower, right, bit by bit going down. But remember, they had a lot that day. And they're like, no, you're going to clean your room. Boom. No, you're going to clean your room. Boom. No, you're going to clean your room. Boom. I don't care about the self-abuse. You're going to clean your room. Boom. Maybe 10, 15, 20 times Harry's trying to injure himself before they finally say, all right, forget it. You're hurting yourself too much. That was 20 times. Clean the room another day, right? We'll don't worry about cleaning your room. So on the good days, when they were full of willpower, when they were well rested, when they had a good day at work, they came home and Harry had to injure himself a lot before they would say, all right, forget about cleaning your room. What about the bad days? On the bad days, when they got stuck in traffic, when they forgot their umbrella, so they got rained on, when they got chewed out by their boss, when they finally come home and they're just done, they're just tired, and they go, all right, we're going to go, Harry's going to clean his room. Harry, you got to clean your room. No, boom, willpower gone. After one hit, they're like, all right, you know what, forget it, not today. So just because they tried, again, this is the insidious part, just because they tried, they inadvertently put Harry on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement, where when they were high in willpower, it took Harry a lot of self-abuse before he got reinforced. When they were low on willpower, it took Harry less self-abuse before he got reinforced. In essence, he was on this variable schedule of reinforcement. That variable schedule of reinforcement made it extremely challenging for Dr. Fox to put Harry through that extinction procedure. On the other hand, if his parents were horrible and did not care, and if every single time they went to Harry and they said, Harry, you're going to clean your room today, and Harry was like, boom, and they're like, all right, you don't have to clean your room. Harry, you're going to do your homework. Boom, one time. All right, you don't have to do your homework. If they reinforced Harry every single time that he self-abused, like horrible parents would, right? Reinforce him every single time that he self-abused. When it came time for Dr. Fox to put Harry through that extinction paradigm, it would have been much, much easier. It would have been just like that brand new car, where you only have to try it 5 times before you say to yourself, I'm not doing this anymore. If Harry's parents had put him on a continuous reinforcement schedule for his self-abuse, Dr. Fox's job would have been a whole lot easier. But because they were caring parents, and they tried their best, they inadvertently made the situation worse by putting Harry on a variable ratio schedule of reinforcement that led to a high stable rate of injurious behavior and also made him more resistant to extinction. All right, so any final questions on up to this point in Harry's treatment? No? All right, so what we're going to do next time, we're going to pick it up from here. So they just did the baseline. We know how bad the situation is.